When you think of owning a casino, your mind probably jumps to Las Vegas. Build a $1 billion box, fill it with games of chance, let probability print your money. It's a compelling image. It's also completely wrong. Because in the world's real gambling capital, a city whose gaming revenues have dwarfed Las Vegas for years, the entire model is turned on its head. That city is Macau. Here, the math of a roulette wheel is secondary to the math of political power. You don't own the land your multi-billion-dollar resort sits on. You don't even own your business the way you think you do. You are a guest, a temporary license holder, and the government can decide almost overnight that your lease on reality is over. In 2022, every casino operator in Macau, sans Wynn MGM, was forced to confront that they don't control their own destiny. They had to renegotiate their right to exist or lose everything. This is the story of how the casino business really works in Macau. Government concessions, shadow banking, and the collapse of a business model that wiped out tens of billions of dollars almost overnight. To understand Macau, you first have to erase the Las Vegas model from your mind. In Vegas, a company like Caesars buys land, builds a resort, and owns it. They answer to shareholders, competitors, and their creditors. In Macau, the system is fundamentally different. The entire industry is built on government-issued licenses called concessions. Think of it less like owning property and more like having a very, very expensive permission slip. Until 2002, this permission slip belonged to just one man, the legendary Stanley Ho, who held a gambling monopoly for 4 decades. But wanting to supercharge its economy, the Macau government, now a special administrative region of China, did something radical. It broke up the monopoly and invited the world in. They decided to issue a limited number of new concessions, attracting the biggest names from Las Vegas Sands, Wynn Resorts, and MGM. They, along with 3 local players, Galaxy Entertainment, Melco Resorts, and SJM Holdings, Ho's legacy company, became the 6 concessionaires who would transform a sleepy former Portuguese colony into a global powerhouse. The pitch was irresistible. The only place in all of Greater China where casino gambling was legal, a market of 1.4 billion people just a short trip away. The result was an explosion. In 2004, Macau's gaming revenue was about $5 billion. By 2013, it had rocketed to an astonishing $45 billion, 7 times the revenue of the Las Vegas Strip. The American giants brought their expertise in building breathtaking resorts and the money poured in. But beneath this gilded surface lay a critical truth. The operators were tenants on government land for their casino operations, and their concessions weren't permanent. They were granted for a fixed term, originally around 20 years, though the exact durations varied slightly before all were aligned to expire on the same day. At the end of that term, the government held all the cards. It could choose to renew, not renew, or completely change the terms of the deal. The casinos were building multi-billion-dollar empires on foundations they didn't fully own, operating under a license that had an expiration date. This was the first crack in the Vegas illusion. The house, it turned out, wasn't the casino. The house was the government. The 6 casino operators had a problem. They had built these colossal, glittering resorts, but their most valuable customers, the ultra-wealthy whales from mainland China, were tough to service directly. This was for 2 critical reasons: money and law. First, China has strict capital controls, limiting how much cash a citizen can take out of the country. This makes it impossible for a high roller to just show up with millions for a baccarat game. Second, and more importantly, gambling debts are not legally enforceable in mainland China. A Macau casino couldn't sue a gambler in a Shanghai court to collect millions in losses. This created a massive credit risk. How do you run a high-roller business if you can't offer credit and can't collect your debts? The solution was a uniquely Macanese invention, the junket system. Junkets were middlemen who bridged the gap between the casinos and the mainland VIPs. On the surface, they were high-end travel agents, but their real business was finance. A junket operator would recruit a wealthy player on the mainland and extend them credit, often using complex informal networks. That player could then travel to Macau and be handed millions in rolling chips to gamble with in a private VIP room. In this model, the casino wasn't in the credit business, it was essentially renting out its floor space. The junket took all the risk. In return, they got a commission from the casino based on the total amount the player wagered. For decades, this system was the engine of Macau's growth. By 2019, this VIP segment, almost entirely driven by junkets, accounted for just over 40% of Macau's total gaming revenue. The casinos loved it because it outsourced their biggest risk. The junkets loved it because they earned massive commissions. But this arrangement was a deal with the devil. The casino operators had handed their most lucrative customers over to an opaque network of third parties. They had become dependent on a shadow banking system that operated in the gray areas of Chinese law. And the biggest junket of them all was a company called Sun City Group, run by a charismatic figure named Alvin Chau. Sun City was an empire controlling an estimated 40% of the entire junket market. Chau was a celebrity, a movie producer, a man seen as a pillar of the community. For years, the casinos relied on Sun City, assuming the system that generated tens of billions of dollars was too big to fail. They were wrong. The end came with shocking speed, a three-act tragedy that began with a global crisis and ended with a single arrest. Act 1 was COVID-19. As the world shut down in 2020, Macau's borders snapped shut. The flood of mainland tourists, the city's lifeblood, slowed to a trickle. Casino floors fell silent. Revenue plummeted. This didn't just hurt the casinos, it put immense pressure on the junket system, which needed a constant flow of players and cash. The engine was seizing up. Act 2 arrived in November 2021 in a move that sent shockwaves through the gambling world. Authorities in the mainland city of Wenzhou issued an arrest warrant for Alvin Chau. He was accused of operating illegal cross-border gambling and running a criminal syndicate. Days later, he was arrested in Macau. The junket king was in handcuffs. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Sun City, the largest financial artery into Macau's VIP sector, was severed. All of its VIP rooms in Macau casinos shut down. Panic ripped through the junket industry. Other operators, fearing they were next, began to close up shop. The Chinese government, which had long tolerated the system's ambiguity, had finally sent a decisive message through a targeted crackdown on its most powerful player. This was the moment the house of cards collapsed. It wasn't a market downturn, it was a state-led demolition. The casinos, which had outsourced their VIP business for 2 decades, now watched as that entire ecosystem evaporated in weeks. The VIP revenue stream that had once made up a huge chunk of the market's income was gone. For the operators, it was a terrifying confirmation of their powerlessness. Their business model wasn't determined by customer demand, but by the political will of Beijing. Act 3 was the sentencing. In January 2023, Alvin Chau was sentenced to 18 years in prison, a sentence that was later upheld on appeal. He was found guilty on over 100 charges, including running a criminal organization that handled illegal bets amounting to hundreds of billions of Hong Kong dollars, tens of billions in US dollars. It was the final nail in the coffin. The junket era, the wild, high-rolling period that had defined Macau for a generation, was officially over. With their most profitable business segment shattered and revenues still crippled by the pandemic, the 6 casino operators walked into the most important negotiation of their lives. Their gaming concessions, after a final extension, were set to expire at the end of 2022. To keep operating, they had to compete for new 10-year licenses. This was the moment the Macau government chose to make its power explicit. For years, the government had urged casinos to diversify away from pure gambling. Those calls had been met with modest success. Now, with the operators at their most vulnerable, the government had the leverage to turn suggestions into commands. The 2022 relicensing process wasn't a negotiation between equals, it was a reset. The government laid out new conditions, and the message was clear. If you want to operate in our city, you will align your business with our national priorities. The new requirements were transformative. First, operators had to commit to massive new investments. But here's the catch. The vast majority of that money had to be spent on non-gaming projects. This meant building state-of-the-art arenas, convention centers, and cultural attractions designed to pull in international tourists, not just gamblers. Second, they had to protect local employment. And third, they had to actively work to attract tourists from outside of China, a direct order to reduce the industry's dependence on the mainland. One by one, the six incumbents, Sands, Wynn, MGM, Galaxy, Melco, and SJM, all agreed they had no choice. They collectively pledged MOP 118, $8 billion, or about $14, $8 billion in new investment. Of that, roughly 90% was committed to developing non-gaming projects and attracting overseas customers. In December 2022, all six were awarded new 10-year concessions effective January 1, 2023. This was the great pivot. The old Macau model driven by opaque VIP junkets was dead. The new model was explicit. The casinos were now instruments in the government's broader economic strategy. Their success would no longer be measured just by gaming revenue, but by their contribution to Macau's transformation into a world center of tourism and leisure. So, what does the economics of a Macau casino look like today? The answer is both surprisingly optimistic and deeply precarious. The pivot from VIP whales to the premium mass market is in full swing. This targets upper-middle-class tourists who come not for a multi-million-dollar credit line but to spend a few thousand on the main gaming floor, see a concert, and go shopping. And incredibly, it seems to be working. After the turmoil, Macau's recovery has been stunning. For the full year of 2025, Macau's casinos generated gross gaming revenue of around $31 billion. That's the highest total since before the pandemic, representing a recovery to about 85% of the 2019 peak, and it's more than double the gaming revenue of the Las Vegas Strip. This recovery is built on a completely different foundation. In early 2019, the VIP Junket segment was over 40% of all gaming revenue. By the first quarter of 2025, analyst estimates suggest its share had shrunk to around 25%, with the mass market swelling to make up the other 75%. The casinos successfully swapped out their engine mid-flight and the new one is running smoothly. But that brings us to the final and biggest risk. The operators have aligned themselves completely with the government's vision. They are now model corporate citizens, investing billions in non-gaming attractions. Yet, this very alignment is their greatest vulnerability. Macau's recovery is overwhelmingly dependent on a continued flow of mainland Chinese visitors. The entire multi-billion-dollar industry and the Macau government itself, which derives well over 70% of its revenue from gaming taxes, is dependent on the political and economic policies set in Beijing. Unlike Las Vegas, which answers to broad market forces, Macau's fate is tied to the political will of a single government. A trade dispute, a geopolitical shift, a sudden change in visa rules, or another crackdown on spending could crater the market overnight. The casino operators have no hedge against this. They have traded the risk of dealing with junket operators for the far larger, more unpredictable sovereign risk of being utterly dependent on a single government's policy decisions. So, while the glittering towers of the Cotai Strip look more impressive than ever, the power doesn't reside within their walls. The true owner of a casino in Macau isn't the company on the facade. It's the government that grants them the license to exist. The casinos won their new concessions in 2022, but the biggest gamble they're taking is the one they can't control, the bet that their interests will continue to align with Beijing's for the next 10 years. In Macau, casinos don't own the game, they simply rent the right to play it. The story of Macau, then, is a fascinating case study in power. It reveals that in certain markets, the familiar rules of business and economics simply don't apply. While the flashing lights and ringing slot machines create an illusion of a self-contained financial ecosystem, the real mechanics operate on a different level. Macau's casinos have shown incredible resilience, reinventing their business model in just a few short years. But in doing so, they have only deepened their dependence on a single all-powerful stakeholder. They may be operating the casinos, but they will never truly be the house.